A physician's hands press upon her swollen belly, cold as river stones in winter. Petronia is 20-2. Her face a practiced mask of emptiness when men touch her. She retreats inside her own mind, to a quiet room their hands cannot enter. But today is different. Today has witnesses. This examination will decide a thing she does not comprehend. Yet she feels its weight in the glances of other slaves, looks she cannot decipher, pity perhaps. Morning light falls through a high window in the small chamber off the atrium. A perfect rectangle of gold lies upon the stone floor. The air holds the scent of olive oil and of herbs smoldering in a bronze dish. Beyond the walls, birds sing in the villa garden. Their song is a bright, cruel counterpoint to the silence in the room. Her master stands against the far wall, arms folded. Gaius Curve Elias Vat IA is 40-3, a man of ordinary face and extraordinary mind. He has made an art of managing human property. He does not look at her face. He has not looked at her face in the 7 months since the night that planted this life within her. His eyes are on her belly as if it were a ledger, calculating. 7 months. The physician announces. The child lies in the correct position. The mother is strong. He should survive the birth. Should survive. The words linger like smoke. Petronia has been a slave since her first breath. Daughter of a slave. Granddaughter of a slave. Freedom is a word without an image. That this feeling inside her, this slow, turning life is new. He has heard the whispered stories of pregnant women in Roman houses. Some masters protect the mother, for the child is valuable property. At this Siomi last labor, a pervin to be solved in dark whispers. He does not know which kind of master Vertai is. He knows he visits certain women at night. She knows he has fathered children here, within this house. What she does not know is what will become of the life inside her, or what will become of her. The question Vertai says, his voice cutting the silence, is whether the investment justifies the cost. The physician nods, as if this is sensible talk of harvest and weather. The mother will be less productive for perhaps 18 months. Set against that, the price of a home-born slave is Zerna, which commands a premium. If the child is healthy and lives, I know the calculations that IA interrupts. I have made them before. What I need from you is a different answer. Will this pregnancy produce a particular kind of child? A change moves through the room, settling called. The physician's hands still. The attendants at the door seem to hold their breath. You wish me to determine the sex. Tell me if it is a boy or a girl. The physician hesitates. There are traditions, signs to observe, but none are certain. The gods alone know. The gods do not keep my household accounts. But, IA replies, give me your best judgment. For 15 more minutes, the physician studies her. Will fat her belly, her eyes, the set of her shoulders. He asks of cravings and dreams. Petronia stands motionless, a vessel awaiting a verdict, based on the signs. The physician says at last, I believe she carries a female. Something eases in Vati's posture. A quiet satisfaction. Good. Monitor her. Weekly reports. He must have adequate food, but no coddling. I want her back at work 3 months after the birth. He turns and leaves without looking at her. The room exhales. The physician packs his tools. The slaves resume their tasks. But Petronia remains, one hand resting on the curve of her belly. Why did he want a daughter? A letter has already been written for this unseen child. Is the life inside her a blessing or a sentence? She will learn the answers in time. He will learn things about Rome that the marble statues do not show. that the great histories choose to forget, that the foundations of lined order were built upon. While everyone pretended not to see, she will learn what Roman masters did with the children they fathered on their slaves, and she will learn why women in her position sometimes prayed not for life, but for an end. What you are about to hear has been scrubbed clean from the common tale of Rome. Textbooks speak of slavery in the abstract numbers economics. They do not speak of the slave quarters, of the systematic breeding of human beings. The praised legal codes democratize the quasi that gave a man absolute power over his own flesh and blood. If that flesh was born of a slave, tonight, you will learn what that power meant. How Roman law decreed that a child followed the mother's condition partus sequitur ventre and how this turned a mother's womb into a factory for perpetual bondage, and how masters decided which pregnancies to allow and which to end, based on the cold arithmetic of profit and loss. You will learn of the Vernae, the home-born slaves. More valuable because they knew no other life. You will learn when Asters sought out the most intelligent, the most comely of their female slaves. You will learn what became of the children. You will learn of breeding programs run with the same care as those for horses or cattle, of quotas for female slaves, rewards for bearing, punishments for barrenness. You will learn what happened to infants deemed unfit or unwanted, of the exposure sites outside city walls where babies were left to die, or to be taken by those with darker uses for them. You will learn why some masters forced abortions, while others forbade them under threat of the whip, and how both policies served the same logic. Human beings as property. You will learn as mothers watching their children sold away at 7 years old, ever to be seen again, because the price was right. You will learn of fathers dining with their legitimate families, served by enslaved sons and daughters who shared their features, and who were met with silence. Subscribe if you wish to understand Rome as it was, beneath the glory in the marble. Comment below, tell me where you are watching from. For Petronia still stands in that room, wondering what her master's satisfaction portends. Not knowing her child's purpose has already been assigned. But before I tell you of Vat's plans for Petronia's daughter, before I reveal the system refined over centuries to mine value from women's bodies, we must go back. We must see how Roman slavery truly worked, the laws that made it possible, and why a man like Va did what he did. Van a single Roman citizen intellect. You cannot understand Petronia without understanding the world that shaped her master. Roman slavery was no accident. It was the foundation, the engine that powered the fields, the cities, the very comfort of the free. At its peak, perhaps 1 in 3 people in Italy was enslaved. In Rome itself, look around, every third person you see is property. Imagine that. Imagine a condition inherited at birth. That your mother's status is your destiny. That freedom is not a right, but a gift granted or withheld on a master's whim. This was Rome. This was the reality beneath the Senate's speeches and the philosophers' lectures. The law that enabled it was not messy or hurried. It was developed over centuries by brilliant jurists who applied their keen minds to the problem of human property, as they would to questions of land or water right. Roman law classified slaves as res man CIP, category that included land, oxen, and mules, a speaking tool, a living implement, and the rule partus sequitur ventre m was its cornerstone. The child follows the womb. If the mother is free, the child is free. If the mother is enslaved, the child is enslaved. Consider the brutal elegance of this. A Roman citizen, a man of standing, could father a child on an enslaved woman in his household. That child would be born as property. He could sell it, gift it, punish it, use it, all without legal consequence. The mother had no rights. The child had no rights. Father's relation to his offspring was not paternal, but proprietary. This was no loophole. This was the system working as intended. Seth understood perfectly. A slave woman's ability to bear children was an independent source of wealth. A healthy young female was worth more than a male, because she could produce more slaves, increasing the master's holdings without a trip to the market. This economic logic shaped everything. Masters ensured their women became pregnant. Hmm. The children were assets entered in household records alongside grain and wine. Taverna, the home-born slave, fetched a high price. Raised within Roman walls, knowing no other way, they were conditioned from infancy, institutionalized from birth. They were the most compliant, the most valuable form of property, and so, masters bred them, deliberately. The household of Gaius Curve Elias Vaia was not unique in this. What set Vaia apart was his meticulousness, his records, his calculations. Where others bred by chance or impulse, he applied analysis. He inherited this villa and 80 slaves. Within 5 years he had 120, mostly through what his ledgers called natural increase. He identified the most fertile women. He tracked each pregnancy from conception. He noted the father himself for a chosen male. He recorded birth weights, health, development. They calculated the cost of raising a child against its projected sale price. A boy could be sold profitably at 10, old enough for labor, young enough to train. A girl was often more valuable kept, for she could bear more slaves. The mathematics were plain. A female slave who bore 5 children created more wealth than any single sale. Vaia did not see this as cruelty. He saw it as sound management. He was optimizing a system that predated him and would outlast him. A system that traded people as property. He was merely an exceptionally competent manager. This is what makes him chilling. Not exception, a evil, but exceptional efficiency within an evil system. The banality of his ledger entries, the total absence of any notion that his property might feel, reveals more than any tale of spectacular brutality. By Roman standards, Vaia was not a monster. He was a successful man. His slaves were fed, for hungry slaves do not work well. They were housed, for sick slaves are expensive. They were not beaten without cause, for damaged property loses value. By the metrics of Roman slave management, he was exemplary. His estate thrived. His methods were studied by neighbors. And those methods included the systematic impregnation of women, the careful tracking of their offspring, and cold decisions on which children to keep, to sell, or to discard. This was the man who owned Petronia. This was the system awaiting her child. Now, let us return to her. Standing in the examination room, hand on her belly, the physicians guess a girl pleased her master. But why? What value does a daughter have that would bring that flicker of satisfaction? She learns in pieces, in the whispers of the slave quarters at night. An older woman named Horatia speaks to her. Horatia has been in this household for 30 years. She has seen everything and survived by saying nothing. Now she speaks. He has plans for the girls. Horatia says, her voice low, the daughters of certain mothers. Sathers with fine features, sharp minds, good health. These girls are raised apart, trained in specific skills, prepared for a specific purpose. What purpose? When they are grown, he sells them to wealthy houses in Rome. Not as common laborers, as something else. Horatia pauses, weighing the words. The buyers pay high prices for young women who are beautiful, educated, skilled in music and conversation, trained to be companions. Do you understand? Petronia understands. A coldness spreads through her. Despite the warm evening, he breeds them for that. He selects mothers who will produce such daughters. You are beautiful, Petronia. You are clever. You can read. You carry yourself with grace. Your daughter will inherit these traits. She will be raised to become a luxury item, and then sold to be whatever her owner desires. Yes, Petronia's hands cup the curve of her belly. For months, she has wondered, hoped in secret corners of her heart. Now she sees the future laid out with terrible clarity. Her daughter's path is already charted. Fat Aya's satisfaction was not pride, but the pleasure of a good investment. What happened to your children? Petronia asks Harasha. The older woman's face changes. Careful mask slips, showing something Rob and Eve. I bore 6, she says. The first 2 were boys, sold at 10. I know not where. The third was a girl. There was something not right in her mind. She was exposed on the 3rd day. Exposed, left outside the walls to die or be taken. Legal. Common. The 4th was a strong boy. The master kept him for field labor. He works here still. I see him sometimes. He does not know I am his mother. He was taken at weaning. I was forbidden to tell him. The last 2 were girls, both chosen for the special training. Both sold 2 houses in Rome when they turned 18. I do not know what became of them. I am not to ask. I am not to remember they existed. Horatia's eyes meet Petroni as, holding decades of compacted grief. Your daughter will be trained and sold. This is certain. What is not certain is what you can do. Probably nothing. His plans are his plans. But, you should know. You must prepare yourself. For the hardest part is not the birth, nor even the parting. The hardest part is living afterward, knowing what was done to a piece of your own soul, and knowing you were powerless to stop it. Petronia absorbs this in silence. She does not weep. Tears are a luxury for the free. That night, in the dark of her cell, she considers her choices. She could try to end the pregnancy. There are herbs, methods passed in whispers. But they are dangerous. When she lives and is discovered, the punishment would be extreme. Destroying a master's property is a grave offense. She could try to run. But to where? She knows no world beyond Maizwahof. She has no money, no papers. Runaway slaves are hunted, returned, made examples of. She could choose death. Some did. But Petronia finds she wants to live. Despite everything, she wants to see her child, to hold her, if only for a time. She could comply, make herself useful, hope that cooperation earns small mercies. Chance to see her daughter now and then as she grows. This is what the system is designed to produce. Acceptance. Channeling a mother's love into dutiful service. Petronia does not know what she will do. He has 7 weeks until the birth. 7 weeks to watch, to think, to plan. She will use them. But one thing she knows with absolute certainty. She will remember, whatever happens to her daughter. She will remember the child taken from her. She will remember the man who did it. She will remember every detail of this machine that treats people as livestock. And if a chance ever comes to use that memory, she will take it. The Roman legal framework that enabled Vat's calculations was not some ancient oversight. It was built deliberately, stone by stone, by celebrated legal minds. The principle that a child follows the mother's condition appears in the earliest Roman law. It solved a practical problem for them, how to determine status with certainty. By tethering the child to the mother, the law created clarity, but it also created a monstrous incentive. The children of enslaved women were slaves, giving masters both sexual access and ownership of the results. Roman jurists debated the intricacies, not the morality. What if a free woman was enslaved while pregnant? The child is free, for status is fixed at conception. What if a slave was freed while pregnant? The child is free, for status is determined at birth. These were discussions of property law and not ethic. The same cold precision applied to reproduction. If a pregnant slave was sold, the child was sold with her, unless stated otherwise. If she was given as collateral for a loan, her children belong to the lender. The language is that of livestock breeding. The framework is commercial. The humanity of the women is legally irrelevant. This created the conditions for reproductive exploitation on an industrial scale. Cyrus could use enslaved women without consequence. For property cannot be wronged. Masters could force pregnancies, for managing breeding stock was normal. Heirs could separate mother and child, for property can be divided. The children born under this rule, the Vern AE, occupied a clear, rarefied legal space. They were property from their first breath. They had no legal parents, only an owner. The woman who bore them had no maternal rights, only duties to her master. The man who fathered them had no paternal duties, only property interests. An Astor who fathered a child and his own slave faced no legal reckoning. He could acknowledge it or not, keep it or sell it. The choice was his, guided by profit, not kinship. Some masters did show kindness, freed such children, gave them education. History records a few who rose to prominence. But these were the exceptions. Noteworthy because they defied the norm. The norm was Vatai's way. Children as assets, mothers as production units, and the norm included practices that go beyond exploitation into active cruelty. What of an inconvenient pregnancy? Even after winning a woman's labor uninterrupted, the law was clear. A master's right over his property was absolute. He could end a pregnancy. He could punish a slave for conceiving without permission. He could expose an unsatisfactory newborn. Medical texts of the era discuss abortive substances. Their use on slave women read it as a routine matter of estate management. If pregnancy reduced a slave's value, termination was a practical solution. Other masters took the opposite tack, forbidding any action that might prevent her into pregnancy. They wanted maximum output. Some households imposed quotas, a required number of children per woman. Failure brought punishment. Both approaches, forced abortion and forced continuation, treated the woman's body as a resource to be managed. Either considered her will. The question was never what she wanted, was what served the master's balance sheet. This was Petronia's world. This was the law that gave Vata a total power over her body, her child, her future. This was Rome at its most logical, its most systematic, its most brutal. The child arrived on a spring morning when almond blossoms whitened the Via Appia. The birth was long 18 hours of struggle, but not fatal. A girl, as predicted, healthy, whole, beautiful even then, with dark, observant eyes. Titania held her daughter, and something fundamental realigned inside her. This small, separate life suddenly mattered more than anything ever had. In her heart, she named her Lucifer, the light that filled the room at her first cry. The name was not official. Slaves are named by their masters. But in Petronia's private self, she was Lucia. For 6 weeks, she was permitted to nurse the child, to keep her close. IA did not interfere. The system would assert itself in time. When Lucia was 6 weeks old, the steward came. The child was to be examined, registered. Tetroni brought her to the main house. The physician was thorough. He measured limbs, tested reflexes, noted her features. He wrote on a wax tablet. Fat IA watched from the doorway. Excellent specimen. The physician pronounced. Strong. Well minus formed. She has her mother's looks, which will serve. With normal development, she should reach the highest quality tier. A mother will nurse for 1 year, Bataille said. After weaning, the child goes to the training quarters. The mother returns to duty. She will be bred again within 3 months. The words were physical blows. 1 year. She had 1 year with her daughter before the machine took her. 1 year before this child was processed into a product. Do you understand? Thaddeus' eyes were on her for the first time. Yes, master. The reply was automatic, carved into her by years of servitude. Good. The child's name is Prima. She is the first of what I hope will be a productive line. You have done well. Nurse her adequately, and you may see her occasionally after the transfer. Prima. First. A place in a sequence. The first of many children Petronia was expected to produce. The first entry in a breeding ledger. Petronia carried her daughter back to the quarters. Holding Lucia, holding Prima, holding this life already claimed by the system. She had 1 year. 360 minus 5 days. She would use everyone. The year vanished like smoke. Days blurred into a cycle of feeding, tending, watching. Lucia grew from a helpless infant into a watchful, quiet child. She observed faces with an intensity beyond her months. She learned to recognize individuals, brightening at Petronia's approach, stilling at a stranger's. She rarely cried. She seemed to understand, instinctually, that silence was safer. In their time, Petronia poured what she could into her. She whispered Greek myths at night, tales of gods and heroes and enduring mothers. She sang songs her own mother had sung, melodies passed down a chain of enslaved women. She taught her the word for love in 3 tongues. She taught her the word for mother. She taught her she was wanted, cherished. She knew these lessons would be stripped away in the training. She knew Lucia would be taught to forget. She taught her anyway, for herself, for the possibility that some fragment might survive. The day of separation came at dawn. No warning, guards entered the slave quarters, took the sleeping child from Petronia's arms, and were gone. Petronia screamed. She screamed until her voice shattered, until others held her down, until the steward came with a whip and laid stripes upon her back until she was silent. The physical pain was nothing. The real pain was deeper, a rending in her core, as if her soul had been torn out and carried away. He did not see her at Altus for 3 years. The training facility was a separate building on the estate's far side. Invisible, a world apart. Petronia learned of it in fragments. The children were raised communally. Their biological mothers were erased from memory. They were taught they had always been there. They learned to read, to write, to calculate. They studied music, dance, the art of conversation. They were trained to please, to anticipate desires, to entertain. And they were trained in submission, not just obedience, but internalized belief in their inferiority, psychological conditioning to make them compliant partners, not resentful captives. The methods were sophisticated. Reward for correct behavior, isolation for attachment, emotional manipulation to redirect love toward future owners. They were taught to forget. By maturity, a girl from the facility was a different person. She knew nothing of her origins. She felt no connection to the woman who bore her. She understood herself only as a product, designed for service. This was Lucia's fate. This was the transformation Petronia could not stop. But Petronia was not entirely powerless. Over 3 years, she built a network. She traded favors with slaves who worked in the facility. She gathered information. Lucia was intelligent, surpassing her lessons. He was beautiful, her promise evident. She was musically gifted, skilled with the lyre. He was also difficult. She asked troublesome questions about origins, about the outside world. She formed bonds with other children that had to be broken. She showed sparks of independent thought. The instructors called these defects. They applied more conditioning. They told Vadae the child might never reach full compliance. Petronia heard this with a complex ache. Grief for her daughter's suffering. Pride for her resistance. Fear that resistance would bring worse punishment. She began to plan anew. She understood the system's machinery now. She had found its weaknesses. He had found others who quietly hated their chains. She could not stage a rescue, but she could perhaps manipulate the gears. She could change the calculations. The opportunity came when Lucia was 7, old enough to be evaluated for future sale. Abe Ayer's representative was coming in from a wealthy Roman house, seeking a specially trained slave. Lucia was to be presented. Petronia learned of the visit 3 days prior. She learned the buyer wanted intelligence and musical skill. She learned her daughter might be sold within the year, lost to Rome forever. She had 3 days. Her plan was simple in aim, perilous in execution. She must get a message to Lucia. She must trust the child. She had not seen in years to understand and act. She bribed a slave in the facility. The message was brief, cryptic. Your mother remembers your true name. Be difficult. Be troublesome. Make them think you are defective. This is how you survive. She did not know if it would arrive. She did not know if it would be understood. She only knew she had to try. The inspection happened without her. She waited for news. It came in pieces. Rima had performed brilliantly in the assessments. Wool. Her intellect, her knowledge, her music all exceeded expectation. Then, in the final interview, she did the unexpected. He looked the buyer's representative directly in the eye. She asked him a question. What will happen to me if you buy me? It was not the question itself, but the manner, a directness that spoke of understanding, of a mind working behind the trained facade. The representative was unsettled. He noted in his report the child shows independent cognition, may prove difficult to manage. Her intelligence could be a liability. He advised against purchase. He suggested more conditioning. Bataille was furious. A prime sale had been spoiled by a defective product. He ordered harsher measures, but he did not sell her. Not then, nor with the next buyer, nor the next. Each time Lucia was presented, something subtle went amiss. A misplaced question, a knowing glance, a hint of self. The buyers passed. Lucia remained in the facility, subject to increasing pressure, but still there, still within reach. Years passed. Hitonia sent messages when she could, simple reminders you are remembered. Resist just enough. And Lucia somehow understood. She walked a razor's edge between obedience and defiance, avoiding the worst punishments while remaining just unpalatable enough to stay unsold. She survived childhood. She reached adolescence, then young adulthood, still unpurchased, still present. By 18, Fataille faced a dilemma. His investment had not matured. He had a woman who was beautiful, educated, capable, but who carried some indelible mark that bias sensed and shunned. His ledgers showed a loss. His logic said cut the loss. But how? Exposure was for infants. Execution required cost he did not have. A cheap sale would tarnish his reputation. He was trapped by his own system. Petronia, now 40, saw the opening years of patience had created. It came through an unlikely channel. Vadia's legitimate daughter, Cavalier, married into aristocracy. Cavalier visited the estate. She was not notably cruel, merely oblivious in the way of her class. Thanks. She was fiercely competitive with other noble women. Status was her battlefield. Petronia, over years of careful service during these visits, had made herself indispensable to Cavalier. She had also planted seeds. She spoke casually of the specially trained women from her father's facility, their grace, their education, of one in particular, too exceptional for ordinary buyers. A household that possessed such a slave would be the envy of Rome. The seed took root. Cavalier began to want this exceptional slave. It became a point of pride. She asked her father for preba y emakataquan. Van Ey's calculations shifted. A sale to his daughter preserved his reputation. It pleased family ties. He recouped some value. He agreed. Frima was sold to Cavalier's household in Rome, but Petronia was not finished. She suggested to Cavalier subtly that a slave who knew the girl's background might tease the transition, ensure she adapted well. Cavalier, finding Petronia useful, agreed to buy her too. After 17 years, mother and daughter would share a roof again. The reunion was not a storybook moment. Lucia did not know her. The conditioning had buried the memories deep. They met as strangers in the new household, two slaves among many, their duties sometimes crossing. Petronia could see her daily, hear her voice, watch her move, but could not simply speak the truth. The truth required trust. It required time. Petronia had patience. To begin with small kindness, favors exchanged in the quiet economy of slaves. She helped Lucia navigate the unfamiliar house. She offered advice that proved sound. Slowly, a bond formed from stranger to acquaintance to something like friendship. Only then did Petronia begin. Not with a declaration, but with stories. Do you know the myth of Demeter and Proserpina? She asked one evening. the mother who searched the underworld for her stolen daughter. I learned it in training. Lucius said, it is a sad story. The separation. The endless search. But they are reunited in the end. Petronia said, not wholly. Not as before. But they find each other. It is only a myth. Lucia replied, myths are stories of what we wish could be. What if I told you a story that is not a myth? Petronia asked, a story of a different mother and daughter? And she told her everything, the pregnancy, the examination, the year together, the separation, the messages, the years of waiting, the plan that brought them here. She told her daughter who she was. The silence that followed was vast. Lucia's face was a landscape of shifting emotions, long trained to be still. You are my mother, he said, not as a question. I am. You planned this for 17 years. Longer. Since before you were born. Since I knew what they would do to you. Why did you not save me sooner? Why did we not run? There was no running. We are property. My only power was patience, and learning to bet a than just an F. Now Petronia reached out, touched her daughter's cheek for the first time in 17 years. Now we are together. Now you know you have always been loved, always remembered. That is not freedom, Lucius said. We are still slaves. I know. And it is something. It is more than we had. Then perhaps together we can make it more still. Tell me your plan, Lucius said, her voice holding a new note, something unstrained. Tell me what comes next. What came next was not revolution. It was the careful construction of a life within the walls of their bondage. Petronia and Lucia became invaluable in Kaivo's household. Their intelligence, their competence, raised them to positions of trust. They gained small privileges, access, influence. They also gained the chance to help others. The household held other slaves, other women bred and sold, other mothers torn from children. Mother and daughter built quiet networks. They shared information. They forged connections across the invisible lines that divided slave from slave. They could not break the system. They could sometimes soften its edges. They could, on occasion, keep a mother and child together a little longer. They could preserve memories the system sought to erase. They could remember. They could bear witness. Eugenia lived 20-2 more years. She died at 16-2, an old woman in a world that aged people quickly. She died a slave, never freed. Right? She died with her daughter's hand in hers. She died knowing the connection she fought for had survived. She died having mattered in small ways to others in the shadows. Lucia lived 3 decades after. He was finally freed in the will of Kaivo's grandson, an old woman herself. With her freedom, she did what phrase could not do. She wrote. She wrote of her mother. She wrote of the training facility, the breeding program, the calculations. She wrote of what Roman masters did to the women they owned, of children bred and sold, of mothers whose grief had no legal standing, for property cannot grieve, where a full account did not survive the centuries. No one thought to preserve the writings of a freed slave woman, but fragments were quoted, referenced in later texts. Scholars call this source the testimony of Prima. These fragments are how we know some of what we know. They are a witness from inside the machine. Jeffrey,'s name does not appear in any surviving history. We know of her only through her daughter's memories. But she existed. She suffered. She resisted in the way she could. She found meaning in the teeth of a system designed to grind her into nothing. Her story, and millions like it, remind us the civilizations we admire were built on foundations of profound suffering. The Roman system was not a betrayal of Roman values. It was those values applied with perfect logic, the same legal genius that built frameworks for justice, built frameworks for owning and breeding people, the same rationality that engineered aqueducts, engineered systems to extract maximum value from human wombs. This is the difficult truth. It cannot separate the glory from the horror. The wealth that built the monuments came from slave labor. The leisure that produced philosophy came from slave labor. The stability that allowed for art and law came from the brutal control of millions. And within that control, specific atrocities were routine. Women were bred. Children were raised as products. Mothers were forced to forget their own infants. Fathers owned their biological children and sold them for profit. These were not hidden crimes. They were legal, documented, discussed in manuals and letters. They weren't normal. This is perhaps the most chilling thing about historical evil. It is often perpetrated by ordinary people who believe they are doing nothing wrong, who are simply following the customs and laws of their time. Gaius Corvelius Vatae was not a monster in his world. He was a good manager, a successful man, and the women and children he treated as livestock paid the price for his society's moral blindness. Remember Petronia. Remember Lucia. Remember the millions whose names are lost, whose stories weren't ever told, whose children were at Aachen, whose grief was not recorded. Remember that civilization is not only the statues and the scrolls, it is also the suffering that made them possible. Remember that law can encode profound injustice. That logic without empathy produces systematic horror. That intelligence can serve evil ends. Remember, too, that resistance is possible even in chains. That love can survive efforts to kill it. That humanity endures in places designed to erase it. Remember the women who loved the children they bore into bondage, who tried to protect them, who never stopped hoping, even when hope was madness. Remember they were people. Subscribe for histories that look at the past without blind admiration. Comment below, tell me where you are watching from. The chill of the physician's hand seeps through her tunic, a stark contrast to the living warmth beneath. Petronia breathes slowly, willing her mind elsewhere, a trick she has perfected over years. But presence of others pins her to this moment, to this cold evaluation. The small room off the atrium is her world now. 8 hours of sunlight cuts across the floor, alive with dancing dust motes. The sharp scent of medicinal herbs cannot mask the smell of her own fear. Fred's song drifts in, a melody of freedom that mocks the heavy silence here. Our master, Gaius Corvelius Vatae, leans against the wall. He watches not her, but her condition, with the detached scrutiny of a man assessing a vineyard. Is death of no memory in the night that began this? It holds only calculation. 7 months. The physician concludes, wiping his hands. All proceeds as it should. The mother is robust. She should live through the birth. The Frey should live hangs between them, a conditional verdict. Petronia's life has been one of certainties, toil, obedience, invisibility. This uncertainty inside her is new, terrifying, and strangely exhilarating. She carries a secret, a turning, fluttering otherness. She knows the stories, the ones traded in the dark corners of the slave quarters. Some pregnant women are cherished for the property they produce. Others become inconvenient, burdens to be lightened by any means. Which is she? She does not know her master's mind, only his methods. He keeps records. He measures output. He makes visits in the night. What he does not do is look at her. The question, Vatae says, his voice slicing the quiet, is not a survival, but a valuation. The physician nods, accepting this economic premise without flinching. 18 months of diminished labor from the mother. Against the market price of a homeborn child, assuming the child reaches working age. I am familiar with the arithmetic. I interrupts, his tone dismissive. My ledgers are filled with such sums. I require a different variable today. What kind of child does she carry? A stillness settles over the room. A physician's hands pause. The streets by the door become statues. Do you wish me to ascertain the sex? The physician's voice is cautious. There are signs. Old wives' tales, but certainly belongs to the gods. The gods do not balance my accounts. Vatae replies, flattened final. Give me your judgment. Another quarter minus our passes. The physician prods her belly, studies her eyes, asks about dreams and cravings. Petronia becomes an object of study. a terrain to be mapped for clues. Finally, the man steps back. By all the traditional indicators, he announces, she carries a female. A subtle change passes over that IA, a loosening of the shoulders. Approval. Good. See that she is monitored. Weekly reports. Feed her sufficiently, but do not indulge her. I expect her back at full capacity 3 months after delivery. He is gone before the last word fades. The room stirs back to life. But Petunia remains, rooted to the spot, her palm pressed to the tight trim of her skin. Why, daughter? What future has just been decided in that single, satisfied breath? If the life within her promiseth her a prison, the answers will come. They will be written in lessons she never wished to learn. Then the hidden mechanics of an empire that polished its marble with one hand and traded in human flesh with the other. To learn why some women in her position prayed to the gods not for a healthy child, but for a barren womb. What follows has been carefully omitted from the grand narrative of Rome. We speak of legions and laws, of aqueducts and oratory. We do not speak of the breeding sheds polite in their cruelty. The legal principle parta sequitur venter m sounds like jurisprudence. It was, in practice, a sentence passed from mother to child in perpetuity. Tonight, we will follow that sentence to its logical end, to the rooms where human beings were assessed for reproductive potential, to the ledgers where children were logged as assets, to the training pens where personalities were broken and remade for specific use. You will understand why a master might prefer a daughter. You will see the markets where such daughters were sold, to not for hard labor, but for the softer, more intimate servitude of the wealthy. You will learn of the Verna born into bondage, knowing no other sky, and thus considered more docile, more valuable. You will learn how some estates operated like stud farms, pairing strong men with intelligent women, seeking optimal offspring. You will hear of quotas, of rewards for fertility, of punishments for barrenness. You will be shown the pits and rubbish heaps beyond city walls, the designated exposure sites where unwanted newborns were discarded. You will see how the law protected a master's right to dispose of his property, be it through forced abortion or forced birth. You will witness the auction block where a child of 7 was sold away from its mother because the price was good and sentiment was not a line item. You will sit at a triclini where a Roman father sips his wine, served by a young slave whose eyes mirror his own, and who receives from him not a glance of recognition, but an order for more wine. Subscribe if you wish to see Rome without its gilding. Comment with the name of your city, for Petronia is still in that sunlit room. Worf. And her child's now a single entry in her master's ledger. But, to understand that entry, we must first understand the ledger itself. We must understand the civilization that produced it. Roman slavery was not a side industry. It was the bedrock. At its height, walking through Rome was to walk through a city where every fed soul was owned. Their condition was hereditary, inescapable, normalized. The legal architecture supporting this was a masterpiece of cold logic. Jurists of renowned intellect dedicated themselves to perfecting the laws of property. Then slaves were property, classified as res mansi, a PI alongside land and draft animals. The foundational rule was simple, elegant, and brutal. Varta sequitur vent rem, the offspring follows the womb. This was the engine of the system. If the mother was free, the child was free. If the mother was a slave, the child was a slave. No matter who the father was. Consider the implications. A Roman citizen could impregnate an enslaved woman in his household. The child born of that union was his property. He could raise it, sell it, gift it, or kill it. The mother had no say. The child had no rights. This was not an abuse of the system, it was the system functioning as designed. Masters were not blind to the economics. A fertile female slave was a self-minus replenishing asset. Her value exceeded her labor, it included her reproductive capacity. Thus, Ensuring pregnancies became a matter of estate management. Some masters provided male slaves for the purpose. Others performed the duty themselves. The children were of home born. They commanded higher prices on the slave market. Raised within Roman walls, conditioned from infancy, they knew no language but Latin, no life but servitude. They were the ideal slave, compliant, loyal to the household, psychologically broken minus in. So, the master bred them. Gaius Cornelius Veii was a model of such shrewdness. He did not invent the practice, he perfected it with bureaucratic zeal. He inherited 80 slaves and, within years, grew the number to 120, primarily through natural increase. He identified his most fertile women. He recorded cycles, conceptions, fathers. He tracked birth weights, early development, signs of health or defect. He calculated the cost of raising a child to saleable age against its projected market value. A strong boy could be sold at 10 or 12. A girl was often more valuable kept, for she could produce more slaves. The math was inexorable. A female slave who bore 5 children over her lifetime generated more wealth than any single sale price. Veii saw no cruelty in this. He saw efficiency. He was a rational man operating within a rational system. The horror lies in that rationality. His records show no hatred, no sadism, only columns of numbers, assessments of stock, notes on breeding potential. At the standards of his class, he was a good master. The slaves were adequately fed and housed, for sick or starving slaves are poor investments. They were not arbitrarily brutalized, for damaged property loses value. His estate was productive, his methods admired, his results studied. He was, in essence, a successful businessman, and his business included the systematic impregnation of human women, the harvesting of their children, and the cold disposal of those deemed substandard. This is the man who owns Petronia. This is the machine into which her daughter will be fed. Back in the slave quarters, the truth arrives in fragments. Parasha, the old woman whose eyes have seen 3 decades in this house, to her in the smoky dens of evening. He has a use for the girls. Urasha murmurs, her voice like dry leaves. The pretty ones, the clever ones, they are raised separately, trained. For what? For the houses in Rome. The wealthy ones. They want companions, not drudges. Women who can sing, play the lyre, converse on poetry. They pay a fortune for such a girl. Petronia feels the words like a winter draft. He breeds them for that. He selects for it. Yes, you have the looks. You have the mind. Your daughter will have them too. She will be polished into a luxury item, then sold. Horace's gaze is ancient, weary. Your daughter will be trained and sold. This is fixed. What is not fixed is how you will endure it. The enduring is the hardest part. Living afterward, with the hollow place inside you. Horace's face, a map of wrinkles, seems to fold in on itself. 6. 2 boys, sold at 10. Gone. A girl not right in the head, exposed. Another boy, kept at the fields. He works here. He does not know my face. 2 girls, taken for the special training, sold to Rome. I do not know their fate. I'm not to know. I'm not to remember. Petronia absorbs this history of Erasua. That night, in her cell, she weighs her non-existent choices. Poisonous herbs, dangerous, unpunishable. Escape an impossibility for a woman with no knowledge of the world beyond the gate. Suicide, a finer rebellion some chose. But she finds, to her own surprise, a fierce will to live, to see this child, to hold her, if only for a season, to perhaps, in some small way, matter to her. He has weeks until the birth. He will use them to think, to watch, to plan. But one resolution hardens within her, cold and sharp as flint. She will remember, she will remember every detail, the name of the man, the feel of the physician's cold hands, the system that tuned motherhood into a production wang. And if a chance ever comes to use that memory as a weapon, she will seize it. The legal world that sanctioned this was no barbaric anomaly. It was the work of Rome's greatest legal minds. The principle of parta sequitur venturem was ancient, designed to eliminate ambiguity. The cria et queen, bright line the mother's status determined the child. Doing so, it created a perverse incentive structure. Jurists debated its applications with scholastic detachment. If a slave woman was freed while pregnant, was the child free? Yes. Status was determined at birth. If a free woman was enslaved while pregnant, the child was free. Status fixed at conception. These were puzzles of property law, not morality. The same dispassionate logic governed a slave woman's reproductive capacity. Such children were part of her value, like the offspring of a prize Jew. If she was sold, they were sold with her. If she was used as loan collateral, they belonged to the creditor. The law protected the master's interest in her womb with the same rigor it protected his interest in a field's harvest. This legal framework enabled a form of industrialized reproduction. Masters could use slave women sexually with impunity. Property cannot be raped. They could for sparings to produce desirable traits. Selective breeding. He could separate mother and child at will. Property can be divided. The children, the verna existed in a legal vacuum. They had no kinship, only ownership. The woman who bore them was not their legal mother. The man who sired them was not their legal father. He was their owner. His power over them was absolute. Some masters were kind. Some freed their slave-born children, gave them education, a start in life. These stories are remembered because they were exceptions. The rule was fact. I as rule. Children as appreciating assets. Others as production units. Then the rule extended to the management of defective or surplus stock. What of a pregnancy that interfered with a valuable slave's primary duties? The master's right was absolute. He could order an abortion. Roman medical texts describe the methods. He could order the newborn exposed. This was legal and common. Conversely, a master wanting to maximize output could forbid abortion, impose pregnancy quotas, punish women who failed to conceive. Both extremes, forced abortion and forced childbirth, served the same master economic efficiency. The woman's will, her body's autonomy, was irrelevant. She was a field to be sown or left fallow, as the owner's calculations dictated. This was Petronia's reality. This was the air she breathed, the law that shaped her world. Ad Orta was born at dawn as the first light touched the hills. The labor was long and grinding, but she lived. Child was a girl perfect with a fierce grip and wide, dark eyes. The Tronian aimed her Lucia for the light. It was a private act of defiance, a secret gift. For 6 weeks, she was allowed to nurse her, to keep her close. The machine permitted this necessary interval. Then, the steward came. Filed was examined, measured, assessed like a piece of pottery. That I observed. A fine product. The physician said, she will do well. The mother nurses for 1 year. That I decreed. Then the child goes to the training house. The mother returns to work. She will be bred again in 3 months. Petronia heard the sentence pronounced. Do you understand? Yes, master. The child's name is Prima. She is the first. I expect more from you. Petronia carried Prima Lucia back to the quarters. She had 1 year. The year passed in a heartbeat. A blur of milky scent and small, warm limbs. Lucia was a quiet, watchful baby, her eyes missing nothing. Petronia poured a lifetime of love into those months. She sang every song she knew. She told stories of clever goddesses and enduring heroes. She whispered words of love, of personhood, into the soft shell of her ear. She knew these words would be systematically erased. She whispered them anyway. The separation came without ceremony. Arms took the child while Petronia slept. She awoke to emptiness and screamed a sound that held no words, only raw error. They whipped her until she was silent. The pain on her back was a distant thing. The real wound was inside, a cavity where her heart had been. She did not see her child for 3 years. The training house was a world apart. Petronia learned of it through a fragile web of whispers. Children they were motherless by design. Their pasts were obliterated. They were aught they belonged to the house. They learned letters, numbers, music, grace. They was cold in the earth pleasing of anticipating desire, and they were psychologically sculpted to accept their status as a natural law. Forget they had ever been anyone's child. This was Lucia's destiny. Petronia could not storm the gates, but she could learn. She could listen. She could plan. She cultivated sources, traded secrets, built a quiet network of resentment within the villa. Lucia, she learned, was a problem for her instructors. Brilliant, beautiful, musically gifted. But she asked questions. She formed attachments. She showed a stubborn core of self. They reported this to VAA as a defect requiring correction. Petronia felt a terrible pride. Her daughter was resisting the mold. An opportunity crystallized when Lucia was 7. A buyer was coming, a man from a senatorial household seeking a cultured companion. Lucia was to be presented. Petronia had 3 days. She bribed a laundress who worked in the training house. The message was simple, coded. The one who named you for the light remembers. He flawed. Be difficult. Be unsellable. It is your shield. She did not know if it would arrive. She waited. The report came back the girl had performed flawlessly, then asked the buyer a direct, disquieting question about her future. The buyer was unsettled. He declined. VAA was furious. The conditioning intensified, but the girl was not sold. This pattern repeated. With each potential buyer, some small, unscripted spark a look, a question would flare. The buyers would withdraw. Lucia remained, enduring ever minus harsher discipline, but remaining present. She grew, she survived. By the time she was 18, VAA faced a conundrum. He owned a masterpiece that no one would buy, a slave of the highest quality, yet somehow spoiled. His ledgers showed a loss. His options were distasteful. Petronia, now decades older, saw her chance. The instrument of her plan was VAA's daughter, Kaivalai. Petronia had made herself indispensable to the woman during her visits. He had also, with exquisite subtlety, planted an idea. She spoke of the extraordinary slaves her father bred, of one in particular, a girl of such rare quality she was almost untouchable. To own her would be a mark of supreme taste, a triumph over lesser women. Kaivalai, perpetually competing in Rome's social arena, coveted this prize. He asked her father for the girl Prima. VAA, seeing a way to recoup value and please his child, agreed. Prima was transferred to Kaivalai's household in Rome, but Petronia was not finished. She suggested to Kaivalai that an experienced slave from the original household would help manage the new acquisition's transition. Kaivalai, finding Petronia useful, purchased her as well. After 17 years, mother and daughter were under the same roof. The reunion was silent, invisible to all but Petronia. Lucia did not know her. The conditioning had done its work. They were strangers. Petronia began again with infinite patience. Small kindness, silent support, unspoken understanding. A bond formed, slowly, in the spaces between commands. One evening, Petronia told a story. The story of a mother who searched for a stolen child. A myth, Lucia said. What if it were not a myth? Petronia asked. What if it were true? And she told her. The cold hands, the examination, the year of light, the long separation, the secret messages, the years of waiting, the plan that brought them here. I'm your mother, Petronia said. Lucia's tired, her reigned composure cracking to show the storm beneath. You are my mother. All this time? All this time. Why did we not run? Where would we run? We are property. My only power was to wait, and to learn to bend the bars from within. Now we are together. Now you know you weren't ever forgotten. This is not freedom, Lucia whispered. No. But it is a thread. And a thread can be woven into a rope. What comes next? Lucia asked. What came next was a life built in the shadows of bondage. They became invaluable in Kaivalai's house. Their competence earned them small privileges. minor authority. They used it to build a quiet network among the enslaved. They could not break their chains, but they could sometimes keep a mother and child together a little longer. They could sometimes warn of a cruel overseer. They could preserve names, stories, connections the system sought to destroy. They could remember. They could bear witness. Petronia lived to see her daughter become a woman. She died not free but not alone. Lucia was freed years later, in an old master's will. With her freedom, she did the one thing she could never do as a slave, she wrote. She wrote of her mother, of the training house, of the ledgers and the calculations. She wrote the hidden history. Her full manuscript did not survive the fire and neglect of centuries, but fragments were quoted, referenced, preserved by accident in other texts. Historians call it the prima fragment. It is a whisper from the dark, a testimony from inside the machine. Petronia's name is lost to official history. We know her only through her daughter's memory, but she existed. She loved,